He just wanted to surprise his wife. A scared little German Shepherd puppy abandoned in a box near a gas station. It was cold. The puppy was trembling, and he couldn't leave it there. But what he didn't know is that this tiny creature would soon risk its life to protect the woman he loved most. This isn't just a rescue story. It's about loyalty, healing, and a moment that no one saw coming. It was just past 8 a.m. when Jason pulled into the corner gas station on Maple and 12th. The city was already stirring. The distant wail of a siren, a delivery truck reversing, someone yelling at a car for cutting the light. Jason rubbed his eyes and stepped out of his pickup truck. Same route every morning, same coffee, same routine. Except today, there was a box by the dumpster. At first, he didn't look twice. Trash, maybe. Leftovers from the night shift. But then, it moved. A faint whimper, barely audible above the traffic. Jason turned, eyebrows knitting. He walked slowly toward the box, coffee still in hand. When he looked inside, he froze. Curled into a corner, shaking, was a tiny German Shepherd puppy, no more than 7 weeks old. His ears were half-formed, his fur thin around the belly. One eye was crusted shut. The other stared up at Jason, wide and full of silent panic. Jason crouched. "Hey, buddy." The puppy didn't growl, didn't bark. It just trembled. Jason looked around. No one nearby, no note, no collar. Just a thin, soaked towel in the bottom of the box, and a few torn pieces of dry bread. His chest tightened. He thought of his wife, Emily, how she'd been stuck at home recovering from surgery, alone most of the day now. She loved dogs, grew up with them. They had talked about getting one someday. What if... Jason took off his jacket and gently reached into the box. The puppy flinched, yelped softly, and backed into the corner. "Easy," Jason whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." Slowly, he scooped the puppy into the coat and held him close. The small body was ice cold. No tags, no chip. Someone had left him to die here, not on Jason's watch. Back in the truck, the puppy sat wrapped in Jason's coat on the passenger seat, breathing fast, eyes never blinking. Jason drove one-handed, occasionally glancing over. "You're gonna meet Emily," he said softly. "She's gonna love you." When he opened the door to their apartment, the familiar scent of lavender and warm coffee greeted him. Emily was in her wheelchair by the window, reading. Her leg was still wrapped in recovery braces. She looked up, surprised. "You're back early." Jason smiled, stepping forward. "I brought something." He unfolded the coat. Emily gasped. "Oh my God. Jason." The puppy's head peeked out, trembling. And then, something happened. He looked at Emily, and instead of hiding, he whimpered and leaned forward, paw reaching out. Jason carefully placed him in her lap. Emily cupped his tiny head, her voice shaking. "You poor thing." The puppy let out a small sigh and melted into her hands. For the first time in weeks, Jason saw Emily smile like she used to. The kind of smile that came from deep in the heart. The kind that only something innocent and pure could bring out. They named him Shadow, because he never left her side again. But what they didn't know was that Shadow hadn't just survived for a second chance. He had a reason for being there. And soon he would prove it, in the most unforgettable way. Shadow slept for hours that first day. Jason had built a small bed from an old hoodie and one of Emily's soft blankets, placing it right beside her wheelchair. The puppy barely moved. Just soft breathing, an occasional twitch, and a faint whimper now and then. as if he was dreaming of the box. Emily stayed close. She stroked his tiny ears, whispered softly, offered him drops of water and bits of chicken broth, and Shadow stayed. By nightfall, his breathing had evened out, his body relaxed. He trusted her. Jason watched from the kitchen, arms folded, eyes narrowed just slightly. He didn't speak his concern out loud, but it was there. Why had someone abandoned a purebred German Shepherd puppy? And why had Shadow flinched so hard when he saw Jason's work gloves? That night, Jason carried Shadow into the bedroom and set his bed at the foot of theirs. Emily lay under the covers, one leg propped up with pillows, her hand still smelling faintly of puppy fur. Shadow curled into a tight ball, eyes blinking slowly. "Good night, sweetheart," Emily whispered, barely louder than a breath. Jason reached over and turned off the light. At 2:46 a.m., Shadow barked for the first time. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was sharp, alert. One bark. Jason jolted up. "What the hell?" Shadow was sitting upright in his little bed, ears perked, body rigid. His eyes were locked on the window. Jason followed the puppy's gaze. Streetlights, wind. Nothing. Then he heard it. A metal noise. Faint. At the back door. Jason got up slowly, stepped barefoot through the hallway toward the kitchen. Shadow followed. No leash, no command. Just silent steps. At the back door, Jason stood still and listened. Nothing now, no voices, no footsteps, just the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of his heart. He waited, nothing came. He turned to head back, but Shadow didn't move. He stood there, facing the door, completely still, like a soldier. The next morning, Jason said nothing. He didn't want to worry Emily. But Shadow wouldn't leave her side. Wherever she rolled, he followed. When she napped, he lay beneath her feet. When she cried from the pain in her leg, he placed his tiny head on her lap like he understood. By the end of the week, Emily had taught him to sit. By the end of the second, he would alert her when the tea kettle whistled or when her phone buzzed. He wasn't just smart, he was watching everything. But then came the third night. Jason came home late from work, past midnight, and entered quietly, trying not to wake Emily. The apartment was dark. Shadow didn't run to the door like usual. Jason set down his bag, took off his shoes, then heard a low, guttural growl from the bedroom. He stepped inside slowly. Shadow was standing at the edge of the bed, his back arched, his body planted, teeth bared. Not at Jason, but at the open window. Jason rushed over. The screen was slightly bent. The curtain moved, but nothing was there now. Only the sound of Shadow's growl, still deep, still ready to protect. Jason reached down, ran a hand along his back. Shadow looked up and immediately relaxed. Jason stood by the window for a long time. Something didn't feel right. That wasn't the wind. And that wasn't just a bark. That was a warning. Shadow wasn't just a rescued puppy. He was watching something, waiting for it to come back. Jason wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but 3 strange things had happened in less than a week since Shadow arrived. The first night, the sound at the back door. The third night, the window, bent screen. And now, someone had opened their gate. It was early Sunday. Jason had just taken out the trash when he noticed the latch on the side yard. It wasn't broken, it wasn't old, but it was definitely unhooked. He stood there, staring at it. They never used that side entrance. Emily couldn't reach it from the house. Jason always left through the front. He walked back inside, trying to keep calm. Emily was making tea, one leg propped on a footstool. Shadow sat alert at her feet, tail thumping gently every time she moved. Did you let him out this morning? Jason asked. Emily shook her head. No. He was already by my side when I woke up. Why? Jason paused. The gate was open. Emily froze, holding the tea bag above the mug. Maybe wind? Jason gave a half smile. Yeah, maybe. But he didn't believe it. And by the look in her eyes, neither did she. Later that day, Jason installed a cheap, motion-activated camera facing the backyard. He didn't tell Emily, he just wanted peace of mind. That night, he stayed up until nearly 2 a.m., eyes locked on the feed from his phone. Shadow lay on the rug beside the bed, unmoving, but always watching the door. At 3:14 a.m., the camera pinged. Jason sat up fast, a dark figure, barely visible, just at the edge of the frame, near the gate. The image froze, distorted by motion blur. But the figure paused, reached for something, and then suddenly backed away fast. The camera didn't catch where he went. But 10 seconds later, Shadow leapt up from his bed and ran to the door, barking harder than Jason had ever heard. Jason jumped from bed. Emily shouted from the other room, "What's going on?" Jason opened the front door just in time to hear footsteps running away. He didn't chase them, didn't need to, because Shadow had just done what no alarm ever could. The next morning, Jan sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, playing the grainy footage over and over. Emily watched silently from her wheelchair. "You think it's the same person?" she asked. Jason nodded. "I don't think they're done either." That afternoon, Emily had a physical therapy session at home. Shadow didn't leave the room. Every time the therapist moved closer, Shadow would watch him with eyes that never blinked. Not aggressive, just intensely protective. When Emily stumbled trying to get out of the chair, Shadow nudged beneath her good arm to stabilize her. The therapist stared, impressed. Has he had training? Jason and Emily looked at each other. No, Jason said slowly, just instinct. That evening, as the three of them sat on the couch, Emily resting, Jason scrolling, Shadow lying with his head on her lap, a message appeared on Jason's phone from the camera app. Movement detected, 8:03 p.m. He opened it fast. It was the gate again. But this time, nothing showed on screen. Just the gate swinging slowly, as if pushed. But the motion had been triggered. Something, or someone, had been there. Jason stood. Shadow stood too, instantly. Jason walked to the back door. Shadow followed, one step behind, silent and alert. When they reached the back gate, Jason saw it. A shoe print, small, fresh, facing the house. Not Jason's, not Emily's. His skin prickled. Someone was watching them. And Shadow? He walked to the gate, sniffed once, then looked up at Jason and growled. Shadow wasn't just Emily's protector anymore. He was the line between their safety and whoever was coming closer. Jason didn't sleep the next night. He stayed up with the camera feed open on his phone, flipping between alerts, motion clips, and blurry stills. The footsteps, the open gate, the print in the dirt. He was done guessing. "I'm going to the hardware store tomorrow," he told Emily. "We need better locks, more cameras, and motion lights. I should have done it sooner." Emily didn't argue. She hadn't slept much either. But she looked down at Shadow, who rested his head on her lap, calm as ever. "If it weren't for him," she said quietly, "we wouldn't have known." Jason nodded, and then, "I don't want to leave you alone." But he had to. Just for an hour. Emily insisted. "You can't baby me forever," she smiled, though there was tension behind her eyes. "I've got my wheels, my phone, and Shadow. We're good." So Jason went. But even as he backed out of the driveway, Shadow stood in the window, ears forward, eyes locked on the truck. 15 minutes later, Emily wheeled herself to the kitchen. She placed her mug on the counter, tried to reach the tea kettle, but it slipped. Crash. Ceramic shattered across the tile. She gasped, jerking the chair back. Shadow bolted in, barking once, then paused. Saw her, saw the broken mug, and trotted over, placing himself between her and the glass. Emily exhaled. "It's okay, baby, just a mess." She bent forward to start cleaning, and then heard it. The side gate latch, that metallic clink. Slow. Measured. Her blood ran cold. She wheeled herself to the living room, heart thudding. Shadow was already at the front door, stiff, silent. Not barking, not growling. Waiting. Emily grabbed her phone and opened the live feed from the camera. At first, nothing, then a hooded figure crouching near the side fence, moving slowly, trying not to trip the camera light. But it triggered anyway. The white flash lit the figure's face just enough. A man, late 20s, sharp jaw, unshaven, holding something. Emily didn't know if it was a crowbar or a pipe. She hit record, then called Jason. He answered on the second ring. "Jason, he's here." "What?" "I saw him. He's at the side. Shadow's at the door. Don't open it. I'm turning around now." Emily's hands were shaking. She dropped the phone. She couldn't reach it. But Shadow didn't move. He stayed in front of the door, chest low, head raised, tail stiff. Then came the first knock. Slow, deliberate. Shadow exploded, barking, growling, throwing his weight against the door with a ferocity Emily had never seen. "Shadow!" she cried. He didn't stop. The knocking turned into scratching, then pounding. Emily reached down, fumbling for the phone. Another bark, another slam. Shadow wouldn't let the man near the entrance. Then, Valence. The pounding stopped. She heard running footsteps. The gate creaked. And Shadow calmed. He sniffed once, sat, still staring at the door. Jason arrived 7 minutes later. By then, Emily had locked every bolt. Shadow was still stationed like a soldier. Jason ran through the house, out to the yard. Nothing. But the gate, wide open, and on the grass near the walkway, a dropped object. Jason picked it up with a tissue, a folding knife. That night, police came, took the video, filed a report. "We'll patrol the area more often," the officer said. "But honestly, that dog's better than most of us." Emily didn't sleep in the bedroom that night. She stayed on the couch. Shadow at her feet. Jason sat next to her, holding her hand. He looked at the dog. "You saved her." Shadow didn't bark, didn't move, but he laid his head on Jason's knee. This wasn't luck. This was fate. And Jason was about to find out why this dog, this puppy they found in a box, had never been just a rescue. He had been sent. Jason didn't go back to work the next day. He stayed home, checked every lock, rewatched the camera footage, replayed the barking in his head. That sound, deep, powerful, precise, wasn't the bark of a normal puppy. It was trained. Emily sat at the table, holding her mug with two hands. Shadow lay at her feet, tail tapping now and then as she stroked his back with her foot. "He knew," she whispered. Jason nodded. "Yeah, he knew long before we did." Later that afternoon, Jason took Shadow to the vet, not for a checkup, but to scan him again. "Maybe someone chipped him and never registered it," he said. The tech ran the wand over Shadow's shoulder. A number flashed. Jason leaned in. It's linked, the text said, eyes narrowing. But not to an owner, to a facility. Jason's heart skipped. What kind of facility? The woman typed on her computer. K9 development program, military sponsored, canceled project, puppy microchipped, but never activated in the system. Jason stared. You're telling me he was part of a government training litter? Looks like it. Back at home, Jason sat with Shadow in the backyard. He tossed a stick. Shadow didn't chase it, but when Jason clapped twice and pointed, Shadow sat, then laid down, then came forward, all without any training. Jason stared. You were born for this. He told Emily everything. She didn't look shocked. She looked validated. I knew there was something in him, she said. He doesn't act like a normal pup. He watches, like he's memorizing the room. Jason pulled out his phone, looked at the recorded footage from the break-in again, then froze. Something small, barely visible, at the edge of the screen. A tattoo on the intruder's wrist, 3 jagged lines. Jason zoomed in. I've seen that before. That night, Jason sat in his truck in the parking lot of an old gym downtown, one he hadn't visited in years. Inside, he found Leo, an ex-cop turned night security. They used to work cases together before Jason left the force. Leo raised an eyebrow when he saw the screenshot. You really want to go there? He asked. Tell me. Leo sighed. Tattoo belongs to a small crew. Nothing major, but they're known for targeting vulnerable homes, usually houses with a woman home alone, easy escape routes, petty but nasty, and they've been in this area for months. Jason's fists clenched. We were on a list. Leo nodded. Looks that way. Back home, Jason stood at the window in silence. Emily came up behind him, Shadow at her side. We're not leaving, she said. Not hiding, but we protect ourselves. Jason turned. I think he's already doing that. That night, as they prepared for bed, Shadow barked once and walked to the back door again. Jason followed, flashlight in hand. But this time, there was nothing. Only a note slipped under the fence. It was wet from the sprinklers. He unfolded it, one line. We're watching. Jason didn't speak. He crumpled the paper, threw it in the trash, and looked down at Shadow. The dog stood completely still. Then, with slow confidence, he walked to Emily, laid beside her chair, and didn't take his eyes off the door. Something was coming, and Shadow was already prepared. It was 1:11 a.m. Jason had just drifted off when Shadow growled. Not barked. Growled. Low, steady. A warning. The kind you don't ignore. Jason sat up instantly. Emily was already awake, sitting upright in bed. Again? She whispered. Shadow was at the window, ears stiff, tail straight. He didn't move, just stared into the dark. Jason grabbed the flashlight and checked the feed from the cameras. Motion detected. Backyard. He tapped the screen. And this time, the figure was clear. Same man, same hood, same gloves. But now, he was holding something shiny. Jason moved fast. He slipped his boots on. Quiet, calm. He grabbed his old service baton from the closet, the one he hadn't used in years. Stay inside, he told Emily. Lock the door behind me. She nodded. Shadow didn't wait for a command. He was already at the back door. Jason opened it slowly. Cool night air hit his face. The motion light blinked on. The yard was empty. Too empty. But Shadow didn't hesitate. He charged toward the fence line, barking sharp and furious. Jason followed with the flashlight. Then he heard it. Footsteps, running. And Shadow says snarling now, to crash through a low patch of bushes on the side. Jason sprinted after him. The man had jumped the fence. Jason caught a glimpse. Black hoodie, backpack, flashlight clipped to his belt. Shadow was gaining. Stop! Jason shouted. But the man didn't stop until he turned and sprayed pepper spray directly at Shadow. The dog reeled back, yelping, stumbling into the grass. Jason lost it. He tackled the man to the ground, fists flying. The guy screamed, flailing, trying to crawl away, but Jason had his knee on the man's back in seconds. "You came to the wrong house," Jason yelled, breathless. By the time police arrived, the man was handcuffed and bleeding. In his backpack, they found rope, gloves, and a folding knife, the same one he had dropped earlier. He had scoped the house for a week, waited for Jason to be gone again, expected a woman in a wheelchair and an easy target. He didn't expect Shadow. Back inside, Jason knelt next to Shadow, gently washing his face with milk and warm water. The pepper spray had hit him hard, but not directly in the eyes. Still, Shadow whimpered, not from pain, but from shame, like he thought he failed. "You didn't fail," Jason whispered, holding his face. "You protected her. You protected us." Emily sat beside them, hand on Shadow's back. "He's more than a pet," she said. Jason looked up. "Yeah, he's family." 2 days later, the footage made it to local news. A neighbor had caught part of the chase on her Ring cam. The anchor called Shadow a real-life hero, but Jason didn't care about the headlines. What mattered was this. Shadow didn't just bark. He acted. He ran toward danger without hesitation because he knew who his family was. That night, Jason placed a new tag on Shadow's collar. It wasn't fancy. Just one word, Guardian. And from that night on, Shadow didn't just sleep by the door. He slept between Jason and Emily, not guarding the house, but guarding his people. 2 weeks had passed since the break-in. The man had been arrested, the case logged, and the neighbors finally started sleeping with their doors unlocked again. But in Jason and Emily's apartment, things were different now. Not tense, not scared, just full. Shadow had changed everything. Emily no longer feared staying alone. Her rehab got easier. She smiled more, laughed more. And Shadow? He didn't leave her side. Even when Jason was home, he always checked on her first. When she cried from the pain of physical therapy, Shadow rested his head on her lap until she stopped. When she dropped things and couldn't reach them, Shadow gently nudged them closer with his nose. He didn't need training, he just knew. One evening, a local news crew asked if they could interview them. The officer who filed the report had mentioned Shadow's role. Jason hesitated. "We're not trying to go viral," he said. But Emily looked at Shadow, sitting perfectly at her feet, tail gently wagging, eyes alert. "Maybe someone else out there needs a dog like him," she said. "Maybe someone left behind a shadow of their own." Jason nodded. So they said yes. The piece was short, 2 minutes on the 6 o'clock news, but by morning they had hundreds of messages, from veterans with PTSD, from women healing from trauma, from shelters asking if Shadow could come visit. Jason read every single one, then looked at the dog curled up between his and Emily's feet on the bed. "What do you think, buddy?" he asked. Shadow opened one eye and wagged his tail. The following week, they took Shadow to a community center for a youth therapy event. It was supposed to be just one visit, but when the first boy, a 9-year-old who hadn't spoken in months, knelt beside Shadow, placed his forehead against the dog's, and whispered, "I'm not scared when you're here." They knew. This wasn't the end of Shadow's journey. It was the beginning. He became a therapy dog. Unofficial at first, then official. He visited hospitals, schools, women's shelters, veteran homes, and every time Jason and Emily were there too. Because they knew. Shadow didn't just rescue them. He rescued others now too. Years passed. Shadow grew into a strong, noble adult dog. Still alert, still loyal. Still sleeping between Jason and Emily every night. Still waiting by the window whenever Jason left for work. And still meeting Emily at her wheelchair every morning. Tail wagging like it was the first time all over again. One evening, Emily looked down at him and whispered, "Do you remember the box?" Shadow looked up. No bark, no wag. Just the deepest, most peaceful gaze she had ever seen. He remembered. Not every hero wears a badge. Some wear fur. Some are found in boxes beside gas stations. But every one of them is waiting for someone who believes they're worth saving. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Let's make the world a place where no dog or human is left behind.